Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our eighth edition of COVID Conversations, Members Helping Members. I'm Scott McCammon, President and CEO of the Milton Chamber of Commerce, and we're pleased this morning to once again be partnering with our friends at the Oakville, Milton, and District Real Estate Board, and we welcome board members to today's conversation. We've got great attendance today for this webinar, not surprising given the quality of our guest speaker. So welcome to everyone for joining us, but also a special welcome because we have some friends joining us from the Maritimes as well. And then of course, Eddie is based in Halifax as well, grounded there because of COVID. So that's to our benefit because as he's grounded, he's available to us. So let me tell you a little bit about Eddie before we get started. Eddie is a Canadian-born, best-selling author, award-winning speaker, seminar leader, and corporate trainer. And Eddie's success is based on his powerful ability to close that gap between business results and personal development. He inspires greatness by awakening the talent in each individual. And not only is he a successful speaker, his career experience as a seasoned business executive quickly built that credibility for him, since he can really relate to both the business success stories and the lessons learned through his 35 plus years of experience. So again, we're very fortunate to have Eddie with us today. 2 weeks ago, we also were fortunate to have Eddie join us for the first time. And I can tell you that Eddie's words 2 weeks ago resonated with our audience in a way that I've never seen before. And I think his personal stories really touched our hearts. And I said last week that, or 2 weeks ago, that it was the right message for these challenging times, and I really believe that. And so we finished the presentation 2 weeks ago. I said, Eddie, you know what, we have to do this again. And so luckily he cleared his calendar for us to be with us today. And this morning we're going to talk a little bit about engaging the workforce for stellar customer service. So since we're on a Zoom call, we're going to zoom over to Halifax and turn it over to Eddie for his presentation. Eddie?
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Now I'm kind of blushing a little bit as I get started. So some of you probably were on the call a couple weeks ago when I talked about Bring About What You Think About, which is a book I wrote. And I always kind of think of that as my evening speech or my dinner speech. This particular topic we're going to talk about today, I'm taking a little piece out of what I would probably be, it could be an 8-hour workshop or it could be a 90-minute keynote presentation on employee engagement. And I really want to, what I want to do, and I'd mentioned this to Scott before the event, is kind of spark a conversation. If we look at what's happening right now in the economy and the impact that's going to have in the future, obviously none of us have the answers. But I will tell you that if you can figure out how to engage people more, coming out of this will be a lot easier for you. So I'm going to share with you a presentation. Now, the way this should work, if I've timed this right, I should come in around 25 minutes or so. We'll give us some time at the end to do some Q&A. So by all means, ask me the questions. If I don't have the answers, we'll share my contact information with you, and I'd be more than happy to get back to you afterwards, because we're in for a kind of a bumpy ride for a couple of reasons as we see ourselves kind of come out of this pandemic. So I'm just going to share my presentation here, and we'll get started. Okay, I don't know if you can remember when you were little. Maybe it was the first time it snowed and you ran outside and you caught a snowflake on your tongue, or the first time you drove a bicycle without training wheels and you looked behind and your mom or dad weren't there. You were kind of on your own. That feeling of camaraderie and passion that we had as children when we could go out and play with our friends. I grew up in a little town on Cape Breton Island, and my mother had one rule. You could do whatever you wanted all day long. But boy, when those streetlights came on, it was time to head home. But what happened to us when we showed up for work? Why is it when we show up for work, we don't have that same level of passion, camaraderie, and excitement that we had as children? Why don't we actually look forward to the streetlights coming on at the end of the day because we get to go home? When I first started my career as a professional speaker, and I've been doing this for quite some time, I used to do a lot of executive coaching every once in a while I'd be coaching someone and they'd say, Eddie, I work hard. Around 4:30 on Friday afternoon, we stop by the liquor store, we pick up half a dozen bottles of red wine, drink all weekend long to forget about work, only to get up Monday morning, have to do the whole thing all over again. There's got to be more to it than that. There's got to be more purpose. And there is. There's a group of people that go to work every day and they love it. They can't wait to get there, and they get upset when the streetlights come on at the end of the day because they have to go home. Not because they don't want to go home, but because they love their job so much. And that's the group I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the people who love to go to work, your most engaged employees. And I want you to think of this from two perspectives. One is, how engaged are you in the workplace? And then how do you engage people around you as well? Now, I've been doing this a long time, and I've read over probably 150 employee engagement surveys of companies across Canada, and I've seen some traits. And we often talk about engagement. We think about the frontline staff as the ones that are not engaged, but quite often it's the managers themselves that are not engaged as well. So I want you to think about it from two perspectives. Why should I be more engaged? And then how do I engage people around you? So here's what I want to cover off today. I want you to walk away from this kind of understanding what engagement is, because it's something that people are going to talk about for the rest of our careers, and it's really rooted in science. The impact employee engagement has on your customer service and profitability, and it goes really, really deep in your organization. Then I'm going to talk to you about some things around the Canadian population trends, because I don't think people truly have their head wrapped around what's happening with our workforce in Canada. And even though we're going to come out of the pandemic with some higher than normal jobless rates, I think you're going to be surprised when you actually start to look at these numbers. Then I want you to walk away with at least one aha moment, and that aha moment will be why people join your organization, why they stay, and why they leave. And when we look at reasons why people leave, often people leave two ways. One, they physically leave your business, and the other is they emotionally leave your business, and they become an ineffective employee, or even somebody who may give poor service. And then I'm going to just touch a little tiny bit on closing that engagement gap. So what are three things you can look at when you go away? And I think that's about all we're going to get to when we kind of look at the next 25 minutes. So when we first look at what engagement is, we should probably talk about what engagement's not. So if you were to look back at the turn of the century, and this would be when we turned 1900, this is probably what your boss would have looked like. And he would have been literally a boss, and he would have been a man. And the reason for that is before 1935, there were virtually no women in the workforce in Canada. It was predominantly a male-driven workforce. And this person would have been absolutely horrible to work for. He would have been a tyrant. In fact, he is the reason why we have unions in Canada. It was to protect us from him, that we would make it home at the end of the day with all of our toes and fingers attached, and our rights as human beings would be protected. And from pressure of unions and just evolution, we kind of moved away from that style of leadership. But I'm sad to say, as I travel across the country, there are still leaders out there that are just like this, that still kind of are in that 1900 kind of turn of the century style of leadership. But around the 70s, something interesting happened, and we started to move away from more of that telling style of leadership into more of a selling style of leadership. This was predominantly driven by baby boomers. And in that case, instead of one person telling everyone what to do, we would have usually a group of people. And if it was baby boomers, they would probably have meetings, because baby boomers love to have meetings. In fact, baby boomers have meetings about having meetings. Let's have a meeting to talk about the agenda of the meeting that we're going to have. And one of the things that we looked for was compliance. And I don't think you could have gone to a session where you didn't hear the word accountability. We have to make our people more accountable. Well, interestingly enough, if people are engaged, you don't have to ask them to be accountable, because they are accountable. And this, although it was better than a telling style of leadership, it really still created a very low level of engagement. And then this whole concept of employee engagement came along, and this is really rooted in science, and there's a lot of numbers and data behind this. But really what engagement means is inclusion and co-creation, that you get everyone involved. That you get your employees involved, you get your suppliers involved, you get the community involved, the people you service, if you're public sector, the people you service in the community, if you're private sector, they would be your customers. And you look for something magical. And what you're looking for is something called discretionary effort. Now, discretionary effort doesn't mean that you're plugged into your phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Discretionary effort means the work you do makes a difference, and the strength of the individuals at work are aligning with the goals of the organization. And I got to tell you, when this happens, it's magical. For most organizations, it's where all of your profitability is. It's where all of your client services is. It's where all of your repeat business comes from. So why would we look at engagement? For me, I don't think there is a time in any of our modern history of any of us that are on this webinar right now that it is more important to look at engagement. For many of you, it will be the absolute survival of your business. If we look back to 2008, when we had the economic downturn of then, many of the companies failed through that economic downturn. But the ones that didn't were the ones that had a higher level of engagement. In fact, companies thrived during that economic downturn because in many cases, they were able to attract employees that they otherwise would not have access to. So, some of the things we look at when we look at employee engagement is companies in the higher quadrant of engagement, 27% higher profits than their counterparts in the same industry, 50% higher sales, 50% higher customer loyalty, and 38% above average productivity. And I don't think you have to look very far through the pandemic to see the organizations that their clients are loyal to, the ones that they're supporting, the restaurants that they're still taking advantage of the takeout, the ones that their memory is the outstanding customer service they got when they were there and they want to support them during this time. I think we're going to see people be rewarded for outstanding service and then people be punished if they didn't give that good level of service. So let me share with you some numbers to put this all in perspective right now. So I'm going to share with you North American Gallup numbers. And I've looked at enough of these surveys that everyone calls it different. If it's Hewitt's Best Place to Work survey or if it's Blessings White or what. Every one of them has something different, but this would be Gallup's terminology. And they will tell you 59% of the workforce are not engaged. Now that doesn't mean 59% of the workforce are not productive and they're not any good. What it means is that there's 59% of the workforce that hasn't figured out how to lock in their talents, their strengths, and align those strengths with the goals of their organization. They're still putting an honest day's work in, they're still coming to work, they're still relatively productive, but they're not knocking it out of the park. 27% of the workforce are what we call engaged. They're the best. They're the ones you can't wait to see show up in the morning. And they're the ones that at the end of the day, don't want to go home because they want to stay at work. They enjoy their job so much. And then 14% of the workforce are what we call actively disengaged. And this group basically quit a long time ago, but they tend to show up every Monday morning for work and they undermine your success. Now, people have talked about these numbers for a long time, and I don't think people truly can get their head wrapped around what it is. So we did some research with the Association of Financial Officers for the federal government and University in Calgary, and we dug a little bit deeper into these numbers to see what they really mean. So anyone that's got payroll right now, and for a lot of small businesses, payroll is probably your largest expense. I want to share with you some numbers that you can really get your head wrapped around. That 27% of your workforce, those absolutely best workers that you have, they actually do 60% of the productivity of your work environment. And we know from a pure labor market that 27% does 60% of the total productivity. But somewhere in your heart, you know this is true. If you need something done, you know exactly who you're going to go to. You're going to go to the Susie to get that done because every time you go to her, it's done right. And you might have somebody that's sitting on their hands right now and you're not going to go to them because it's not going to be done right and you're going to have to redo it or you're going to have to assign it to Susie. So every one of us know who that 27% are. They're the best people that we have. Now remember that 59% that actively disengaged, or not the active, but the disengaged group, they're good people. But it takes 59% of them to do 60%. Now, I know that I can't look at your faces because I'm staring into a camera right now, but if I was looking at an audience right now, I would have lost a couple people, especially if you have any kind of a financial background. And this really became apparent to me in Ontario a few years ago, speaking to 250 accountants, when they all started to giggle when I put this number up, and finally somebody put their hand up and they said, Eddie, you can't have 120% productivity. It's an impossible number. So basically what I'm telling you is it takes twice as many employees when they're not engaged to do the same amount of work as that 27% when they are engaged. But that's not where the numbers stop. Remember that actively disengaged group? Well, that actively disengaged group, they actually do negative 20% productivity. Most organizations have people in their companies that are literally tearing their businesses down as the rest of you are trying to build it up. Now, we hear those numbers a lot as well. So I want to share with you a little deeper into this to really dig into your payroll. So remember that first group, that 27%? In that group, you're getting 90 cents on the dollar. That's the best you're going to get out of a human being. They might take the odd sick day. They might be on Facebook now and again, or they might be doing something at a personal level at work, but they're extremely productive. So they're the ones that are giving you the highest level of profitability in your organization, the highest level of customer service, and you get about 90 cents on the dollar. So you might lose them a day or two a year. This other group, this 59%, you're actually getting 70 cents on the dollar with this group. So with this particular group, they'll take a little bit more time off. They'll dip into the benefits package a little bit more. They'll spend more time on social media. They're more personal interactions. They're not as dedicated to the service in your organization. Now, if you worked for me and you came to me and said, Eddie, I need to hire another full-time equivalent, I tell you, if you can move 3 of those people into the engaged group, you just got yourself a free head count. Because the productivity bump in conjunction with the payroll savings for both 3 that you can move from the disengaged group into the engaged, it's like getting a productivity bump. And I think this becomes incredibly critical for smaller businesses where everybody counts in an organization. So how do we get people to move from one area into another? And remember, save your questions, because I really think that we can spark a bit of a conversation around this. Now remember that other group, the actively disengaged? You're actually getting 50 cents on the dollar for this group. They take every sick day like it's a sense of entitlement. They come in late, they go home early, they undermine your success with gossip. And the funny thing is, again, I'm looking in a camera, but if I was in front of you right now and you had 2 or 3 people representing a company at a table, I know exactly what would have happened. Somebody would have looked at someone else and they would have giggled and whispered. And the reason why they would have giggled and whispered is they know exactly who that person is in their organization. They go, oh my goodness, that's Jimmy. Jimmy takes every hunting season off. He leaves like it's a sense of entitlement. He comes in late, he goes home early. So if I was standing in front of you, I would ask you a question. If you could put a name on that person, if you knew who you were getting 50 cents on the dollar, if they were undermining the success of your organization, why are they still there? And you know, it's an interesting question, and I've heard all of the answers. Too expensive to get rid of them, can't find someone else there, I want to give them another chance. But I have to tell you, I speak to a lot of groups of entrepreneurs and owners of businesses from coast to coast to coast in Canada. And I'd have to tell you, sometimes that group own the company. And there's nothing worse when the leaders and managers and owners in a business are the ones that undermine the success of their own organization. So here's something I want you to think about. You're always going to have actively disengaged people in your organization, but what you really want to be doing is focusing on that 27%, the best employees. How do you nurture those? How do you grow those? How do you use that group of employees to dip into your disengaged, that 59%, and get them to move into the realm of the happiness, into that 27%, and grow your profitability and customer client services through that. So, and just minimize the damage that the actively disengaged do in your organization. Now, I get a lot of questions from people when I'm traveling. One is, Eddie, what's more important, culture versus strategy? Lots of times the accounting side and the operations people say, oh, I really think strategy is more important. But the reality is culture will eat strategy for lunch every day. If you can't create the right culture in your organization, it is almost impossible to execute the strategy that you want to be able to execute in your organization. So I want to share with you some trends that will drive this home, and behavior differences that are happening in the workplace, and things I really, really want you to think about for the next 5, 10, 15 years as we head into the future. Because believe me, we're in for quite an interesting ride. And it all starts with these 2 people drinking wine sitting on their Chesterfield. The aging population. Now, the interesting thing with the aging population is we've known about this, but I don't think people really get their head wrapped around what it is. So I'm going to walk you through it, just so you can really get a sense for the impact of this aging population. So back in the 1950s and 1960s, Baby boomers were under the age of 14 years old. And you know what? We had to build tens of thousands of schools to support them, pediatric wards, baby food manufacturing facility. Sears came out with a wish book and they put Winnie the Pooh on the front cover. And unless you're a baby boomer, you probably have no idea what I'm even talking about. But that's when we first realized the baby boomers were a force to be reckoned with. It was a population size that we have never seen in the history of our country. And then something interesting happened in the 1960s, the 1970s. Baby boomers started to become of age. They started to fall in love, finish school, go to work. Now, here's something interesting. I've been standing in front of audiences talking about generations since 2005. In 2005, when I would get to this part of a slide, I'd always look at the audience and I'd say, if you were born before 1964, and that would make you a baby boomer, I want you to stand up. And interestingly enough, what would happen is about 90% of the audience would stand up. And over the years, as I've asked that question, I see less and less baby boomers in the room. In fact, my first conference I spoke at a few years ago in Edmonton to a Boston Pizza managers conference, 85 managers, not a single baby boomer in their organization. So, but the second question I always ask the baby boomers is if you were once they're standing up, is if you were the only child in your house growing up, you had no brothers or sisters, you can sit down. No baby boomers sit down. But every baby boomer that would be standing in that room would represent a family larger than we currently produce in Canada. And you know what? It's not uncommon, as I went through the numbers, that we would have baby boomers that would have more than 10 people in their homes as siblings. But the largest I encountered was a gentleman outside of Red Deer, Alberta, a little town called Lacombe, and he came from a family of 17. Now this has some real relevance when we look at the workplace. So I remember looking at him and I said, my goodness, 17 children. Did you live in a big house? He goes, no. He said, actually, he said, we lived in a small house. He said, I said, well, how did you possibly sleep 17 children? He said, we actually didn't do it by age. We did it by length. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they said we'd sleep 3 long ones up and down in the bed, 2 short ones across the bottom. He said, you didn't want to be a short one. That was the worst place to sleep, in the bed. And I said, I'm just curious, when did you move out of the house? He said, well, I actually moved out of the house when I was 17 years old. And I looked at him, I said, was that like normal or early or late? He said, it was actually late. He said, Mom and Dad were looking at me like there's something wrong with this one. Why is he still here when all the other siblings moved out between the ages of 15 and 16? So it got me thinking. I went home and I looked at my beautiful daughter, Sasha, and at the time she was about 24 years old. And then I said to her, I said, Sasha, I said, I'm just curious. I said, when are you leaving? And she said, I'm not going anywhere tonight. I said, no, not tonight, Sasha. I said, when are you going out? When are you leaving the house? When are you moving out? She goes, Dad, I never thought about it. She said, well, Dad, she said, you bought me a car, you pay for the insurance. When I'm downtown at the bar and I'm running low on cash, you take your iPhone out and you transfer some money in my bank account. I own every piece of electronics known to man. Mom does the laundry for me. Why would I leave? Got me thinking, when do kids leave? So those of you that are on this call right now, and you know me as a bit of an inspirational speaker, I'm going to depress you right now. Because if you have a Y generation or a Z generation living with you now, chances up until 2008, they were going to stay with you until they're 28 years old. Now, why is that relevant? Life expectancy of a Y generation in their place of employment right now is 18 months. When that gentleman left his house in the 1960s, life expectancy of a baby boomer in the workplace was they would only change their careers 3 times in their whole life. So we had this moving target. Now, I don't want to completely depress you, so I've done some further research on this. And the most recent data now will tell you if you have a Y or Z generation living in your house, they're now going to stay with you until they're 33 years old. So get used to having these people. And you know what? Some of them will go away and they're going to come back and they're going to bring more people with them and probably even some additional pets that you can have in your house as well. 1970s, 1980s, baby boomer really started to find their way in the world. They started to become young managers, get married, save money. The 1980s to the 1990s, baby boomers started to spend money like drunken sailors. In fact, some of you will remember we drove interest rates well into the double digits and people were in fear of losing their homes. The baby boomers is a very materialistic generation. If we had more time, I'd go into more detail on the generations, but I just want to kind of walk you through where we are. In the 1990s to 2000, baby boomers really started to find their way in the world. They started to buy these big homes and shopping and putting money aside. But what nobody was thinking about was what was happening behind the baby boomers, which was the X generation. First negative growth generation in the history of the world, and it's happened with every one of the G8 countries. And it is a problem that we're just going to start to feel over the next few years. So now we go 2000, 2010, we start to approach where we are right now. People between the ages of 55 and 64, the size of that population would increase by about 50%. That's not where it got interesting. This is where it starts to get interesting. If we look at where the data shows us now, the population of between the ages of 55 and 64 actually will increase by over 70%, and the 65 plus will increase by 53%. And if you look behind us, we really don't have anybody coming behind us to support this massive generation as they start to head into the workplace or into the retirement. In fact, so much so that this year, we will have 8,000 Canadians a week retire and leave the workforce. So right now we have about, well, theoretically, if you took the pandemic out of the question, we'd have about 8 Canadians working, supporting every one that's retired. By 2040, theoretically, we'd only have 2 Canadians working, supporting every one retired. Now, there's going to be a lot of things that will change, and immigration that will change those numbers. But the only way we can manage that kind of, few people managing the ones that are retiring is going to be through increased engagement in the workplace and technology and so on. So here's what I believe. Other than the bump that you're going to feel when we come out the other side of this economic downturn, and according to Bank of Canada yesterday, it's not going to be as bad as we probably initially thought that it was. The biggest competition in the future for all of you is going to be for human resources. It's not going to be for customers. But here's the interesting part on this. Those of you that get the human resources, you're going to get the customers. That's going to be your reward. It's going to be like 2008, where people were rewarded for giving good service and taking care of their clients by being able to attract people in their organizations they otherwise may not have been able to get and come out the other side a little bit better. But you really want to focus your attention on engagement, because this is where attraction happens, and this is where service and profitability happens. So, I think there's tremendous opportunity. I think if you're worth your salt as a manager, if you give good service, if you take care of your people, if you're a hardworking employee, I think young people right now in the workplace, I think the world will be your oyster. I think you will see opportunities that we have never seen in the workplace before. And I think it's the best time to be alive and working in Canada. So even though we're going to go through a little bump here, I think that you're going to see this as a tremendous opportunity for everyone. So I want to do 3 questions, and I've got about probably 9 minutes left that I'm gonna chat here. And this is your aha moment. And I want you to think about this from 2 perspectives. Your perspective as an employee yourself, but also how do you engage people around. And every one of us, when we walk in the door, we kind of ask 3 questions. And the first question we ask is, why is this job even important to me? And that will come down to things like paychecks and benefits and the type of work that it is, and it's close to me, and I have to go to university, I got to save for money. We all have our own reasons why when we walk in the door, a job is important to us. Depending on your age, it could be completely different. If you're 55, you might want to give back. If you're 25, you might want to buy a house. So every one of us have a different reason why that happens. The second question every one of us asks when we walk in the door is, who am I going to be working with? What are my fellow employees like? What's my manager like? Who do I interact with every day? Do I interact with people in the community? Do I interact with other employees, with bureaucrats? What do I do? And oh, by the way, I'm going to send you a copy of this presentation as well, because I know I can be chatty and a little fast and you might struggle keeping up. The next question every one of us asks is, what am I going to be doing? What do you want me to do when I show up for work? What am I going to use my hands and my mind for when I show up for work? Now, they're the 3 questions that every employee asks when they walk in the door, and you did it yourself. But here's how we answer those questions. That first one, why is this job important to me? That's why we join. We join if the paycheck is right, if the benefits, if the geography, if the vocation or the location, whatever the reasons why the job was important to me. If we hit those hot buttons, that's why people join our organizations. The second question, who am I going to be working with? That's actually the reasons why people stay. People stay if they like the people they're working with. And there's a myth out there, and the myth is people don't leave companies, they leave their boss. It's statistically not the biggest reasons why people leave organizations. People will stay if they dislike their boss, if they like their fellow employees, or if they like the people they interact with every day. We see that a lot in the healthcare. People might go to work and they love, working with children and patients, can't stand their bureaucracy, don't like their supervisors, but still show up for work every day because they love the people they interact with. The actual number one reasons why people leave the organization right now is if you get them to do things they don't like doing. Now, what's really interesting, baby boomers actually didn't leave for this reason. In fact, I remember talking to my father one day and telling him, I'm looking for a job with purpose. I want to do something that I love to do. And he said to me, suck it up, buttercup. It's work. It's not supposed to be fun. But the reality is this is the number one reason why people leave their organization right now. So here's what I want you to think about. I know that a lot of you that are watching this right now have a puppy dog at home or a dog, full-grown dog. And what you'll find is when you leave and you go to work and you come home, the dog is so excited to see you. He wiggles his tail, he's all excited. And when you walk in the door and you get to the door and you go, oh my goodness, I forgot my laptop, it's in the car, and you leave, you go back out to the car, you come back in, he shows that same appreciation as if you've been away for 8 hours. If you got one thing out of today's session, if tomorrow or Monday, whenever you reopen, if you're not already open, and your employees show up, wag your tail, be excited. Show that level of appreciation to them because they will undoubtedly pass that level of appreciation onto your customers as well. It is the best way to increase that profitability and customer service within your organization. So I'm going to leave you on just something to really think about. There's 3 things in closing the engagement gap in your organization. And the first thing you have to do is you have to get to know the people you work with better. And you want to get to know them from 3 perspectives. One is you want to get to know them based on their values and beliefs around their age. And if we had more time together, I'd really go into depth on that part of it. The second thing is you want to truly understand communication styles, values, and beliefs based on gender. And then you want to understand values, beliefs, communication styles based on culture. And if you can figure those 3 out and get to know the people, that's where you'll truly get to know their strengths and then be able to align those strengths with what you're trying to achieve within your organization. And it's important that you spend time and communicate and do that. And we'll probably talk a little bit about this in our Q&A. You grow your team by aligning their individual strengths. So you figure out what their strengths are and you look at the goals of your organization. You say, how can I leverage this particular strength this person has with what my financial goals are, my customer service goals, my customer retention rates, whatever it is you measure as success in your organization. And the last thing, and I truly believe this from within my heart, and in my career, I have managed thousands of people and sold more than $1 billion worth of products and services in my career as an executive through my life. I believe it is your responsibility to inspire people around you. I think you need to become the person you want the people around you to become. And you have to ask yourself from a pure, honest perspective, am I that person? Am I the person that I'm inspiring people to be? And I think that inspiring leaders really help move us in the direction that we want to head. Now, one last tip. I've read, like I would say, probably 150 employee engagement surveys, and undoubtedly, the number one thing that bubbles to the top of employee surveys is the lack of communication within organizations, that people just do not feel that leaders and managers communicate properly with their staff. And even customers don't feel that organizations communicate properly with them. Given the amount of social distancing and this whole new technology of me reaching out to you through a camera versus shaking your hand or giving you a hug or whatever, however we would normally interact with people, however you think you should be communicating, I would double it. I would make sure you're communicating way more than what you think you need to be able to communicate in your organization, because it is critical, especially during difficult times. Now I'm going to give you a couple things. So after this session's over, you're going to get an email from me, and there's going to be a couple little things on there that will help you. And there's also an opt-out. If you never want to hear from me again, please opt out of my email, but I want to make sure that we at least reach out to you. And I might not have everyone that's on this call because my list would have been last night. So if you register today, I might be short of some, but I'll send it on to Scott and he can forward it off. So this is something we offered last week. If you didn't take advantage of it, you should definitely do it. We have a free stress program. It's a series of videos. I think it's critical to really kind of check our stress right now. When we're in that fear, anxiety, and stress, we actually don't lead very well. So you want to make sure that you kind of keep your stress in check. And I would pass that on to your staff as well. It's a great little free program. We have a Leadership Thursdays video series, which will give you some tips, and it goes on for maybe 2 months. Every second Thursday, you're going to get a little leadership video. And I wanted to come up with something that's kind of really cool that we could offer up. So I actually have this online leadership program that we sell for $300 normally. And it's a series of videos. It's pretty in depth. It's like 8 hours of content. So what I jammed here in 25 minutes, it's 8 hours. There's a big workbook that goes with it. And you can literally sit down with your team and do the exercises together. And it allows us to be a little bit connected as well. If you're interested, $100 or $99. I think it's a great tool for the price of a latte a day for a month, and it could have a profound impact in your organization. So I'm going to break away from this. We're going to do a little bit of Q&A, and I'm going to take a drink of water, and I'll get Scott to come back in.
That's great. Thank you, Eddie.
Oh, you're welcome. A lot of words in a short period of time.
High impact words, though. You know, it struck me too that you talk about the lack of communication. I wonder how much of that right now is based on people forgetting to unmute themselves on Zoom calls.
And even uncomfortable on Zoom calls. You know, it is a different world to communicate like this for sure.
So we're starting to get some questions in. I encourage everyone that's listening to fill in some questions as well. Eddie, you talked about those productive employees, the 27%, and how the managers tend to go to them because they know they can get things done. Is there a role for the 27% to also somehow mentor the other ones, or is that not the best use of their time?
That's actually a really good question, and absolutely. So when I look at, I kind of look at that as a graph, right? So you have the 27%. That are at one end, and then that actively disengaged at 14% on the other. You have this big group of people in the middle, this 59%. So I always liken it to dropping a pebble in the water and seeing the waves go out. So if you can get the support of the 27%, they will go to the 59% and start to recruit that group to join the ranks of the happy. So what I would always suggest, and it's the way we always lead in the organizations that I would have led in the past, is whenever we're going to do something new, we garner support from the 27%, and we get that 27% help sell it in the organization. I think a lot of rookie managers, what they do is they go to the 14% and probably try and convince them it's a good idea to change, and it undermines their own success. So absolutely, that 27% is the catalyst. And the other thing you might want to note is that the 27%, your best employees, only 15% of those would ever consider leaving you. So, and they won't leave for money. They'll leave more for purpose or for better job opportunities. So they might be your best employees that they're kind of promoted to the top, and the only one above them is maybe the owner of an organization, and an opportunity might come along. That 59%, 85% of them are open to leaving your organization. So the more you can move into that 27%, the less likely you're going to lose your best employees, which is a real benefit as well.
Is there fear, though, if you're going to the 27% with a new idea and getting their buy-in to then take the idea to the rest, you're also creating cliques within the organization?
Well, yes, but I think you have those cliques anyway. You have this 27% that are really hard workers and putting that extra effort in. Then you have this 59% that just kind of come to work every day. I think you have to be careful of showing favoritism, but I think there's a difference between showing favoritism and assigning activities to that 27% that foster them to go and work within the 59% to get them to join the ranks. So I think you have to be obviously a little politically correct on how you would do that for sure.
Sometimes employees see their own strengths, and they they feel very strongly about what are their strengths within the organization. But sometimes their boss sees their strengths as being very different, and maybe what the employee sees as strengths, the employer sees as a weakness. How do you deal with that?
You know, that's an excellent question, and it's one we get all the time. So I have a little secret that I do, and obviously I can't do it right now because I'm in these virtual settings, but I travel a lot. And when I get to an airport, I always put a t-shirt on, the baseball cap, and I sit in the bar and I eavesdrop on people in the bar. Because in the bar, one of the things that you get in an airport in a bar is you get conversations about work, what people like about their jobs and what people don't. And one of the things that I would glean from this research is that many employers never actually have the conversation with their employees and ask them what their strengths are. Now, just because an employee is good at something doesn't really make it a strength. So if you follow any of the works of Gallup or Marcus Buckingham, who wrote the book, Go Put Your Strengths to Work, he will tell you a strength of an employee is normally something they're good at. But for it to be a true strength, it has to be something that the employee feels good about doing, that they enjoy doing it, they look forward to it, they normally excel at it. So what we often do is we assign tasks to people because we think it's their strength. But the only way you're going to know whether it's their strength is if you actually sit down with the employee and say, if you were to come to work every day and do one thing every day, what would it be? What would be the most fun thing you could do every day? And that's how you start to identify what the strengths are. So for example, I'm a wizard at spreadsheets. I'd rather poke a pencil in my eye than do a spreadsheet. But there are accountants out there that love doing spreadsheets. That's their strength. So I'm good at it, but it's not my strength. They may have things they're good at, but it's not their strength. Only way you're ever going to know is to sit down with your employees and ask them.
So one person is saying that they notice that sometimes employees become disengaged when there's a change in their job or a change in the organization. How do you prevent that disengagement from happening?
That's a really, really good question. So here's the reality. And we see this a lot of times when there's acquisitions in companies and then new companies come in and they reassign what people get to do in an organization. If you really think about those three things, why was the job important to me? Who am I going to work with? And what am I going to be doing? In a perfect world, so if we didn't have the pandemic right now, our jobless rate was heading to sub 5%. The harsh reality is if you get people to do things they dislike, so if you change their job description, you get them to do things they dislike, there's a good possibility two things will happen. One is they'll become unengaged and stay in your organization, become less productive, or they're going to leave your organization and go work somewhere else. Now, I have seen this enough. I've literally hundreds of organizations we work with. And I remember one that really stuck out in my mind. It was with a federal government department, an inbound call center. There's a manager of a group of inbound call center reps, and she did an outstanding job. Her supervisor came to her and said, we would like for you to manage a group of people in the outbound call center. Now that's people from calling, telling people that they have to collect cash. It's a whole different type of environment. Within the first month, she called in for her first sick day. Her productivity started to drop, and within 3 months, she went on disability. So there's the harsh reality is if you get people to do things they dislike doing, you risk that. You risk reducing your productivity, or you risk losing that employee.
Sometimes this is a comment as well as a question, but sometimes not dealing with an actively disengaged employee can be really damaging to the group dynamics within an organization and the productivity of teams, especially if it's a smaller team. But the question is, how much time and effort should you be putting into, as a manager, putting into actively trying to deal with the disengaged employees to get them on board?
You know, it's an interesting question, and I often wonder if we have these. If it's my organization and I've worked really hard to build this business, and I have someone on my team that for every dollar I pay them, I'm getting about 50 cents worth the payroll, just pure payroll, and a negative 20% productivity number out of them. And I'm the, I mean, you know me from being a motivational speaker. I believe in giving everyone a fair chance. And you have to ask yourself, why are they there? So I would give them the minimum amount of effort. I would do more to cushion the rest of the team from that person if that person is undermining your success. But a lot of times it's because they just don't have what it takes to probably make the right decision. And I bet you, of the people that are on the call right now, I bet you half of them sometime in their career have had someone like that, and they've left the organization, or maybe they would even terminate it for whatever reason they left, and the other employees would have come to you and say, what took you so long? So you have to be careful, and if they're the owner of the business, then it's a whole other issue. But minimize the damage they do. Focus on your best employees.
Is it wrong to have LinkedIn up on their computer screen when they walk in the morning?
Yes, or even go to their LinkedIn profile, and if it says, open to other opportunities.
So because a lot of businesses had to shut down really quickly for the pandemic, a lot of managers that maybe were trying to engage their workforces a little bit more, maybe didn't have the time to do everything they wanted to. How do you now pivot to engage the employees when they're all remotely working?
Well, that's a great question, because the three questions people ask don't change just because they're at home. Why the job's important is the same reason. It's the work, it's the paycheck, it's the benefits. Who you're going to work with is just as important. And that's where, things like keeping virtually connected. My daughter works for a recruiting firm here in Halifax, and they do virtual cocktail parties. They've done costume parties. Like they make sure that they really communicate and keep that the nucleus of the team together. And then the next part is, what am I going to be doing? What activities? So now what you have to do is look in a virtual world and say, what activities can I get them to do in a virtual world that they would enjoy doing if they're working from a virtual perspective, or if they're working in some kind of a social distancing type of an environment. So it's the same three questions. And my nephew in New York City had worked remotely for years and just got a job in New York in this firm. And he was all excited because they had this fabulous office, and they had these jelly bean machines and all this. And he literally was 1 month into it, and he's now working from home, and he's exactly where he was. But they're actually leaning on him now to teach the rest of the team how to work from home. So they found meaningful work for him, something that made him feel good and purposeful, that he could teach people how to work from home and how to motivate yourself. So the three questions don't change, but a good leader will figure out that third one. What can I get them to do, even remotely, that will make them feel better?
So the next question is a little bit of a technical one, asking if you use Gallup's Q12 engagement survey, and also if you use Gallup's Strength Finder assessments.
So traditionally, I never do employee engagement surveys. I'm the person that comes in after somebody has done a survey and they want to have their numbers improved. I love Gallup's research because it's one of the first to market, and their numbers are global, and you can kind of pick it by country. I love the Strength Finder. Marcus Buckingham is one of my absolute favorite speakers in the whole world. If you've never heard him, go to YouTube and watch one of his videos. I really, really believe a lot in what he says around the Strength Finder. In Canada, we don't see as many companies use Gallup. We see more people use like Hewitt's Best Place to Work survey. And even in my own organization, we have a survey that we do for clients, but it's not kind of our normal, it's not normally what we would do, but we do have that capability. But I love the Gallup stuff. I just think that they lead the world in the whole engagement matrix.
We've talked a fair amount about teams and sort of productivity within an organization. Some of the people that have joined us today are self-employed, but still have challenges keeping themselves as the employee engaged and motivated. So, how is it different for somebody that's self-employed versus somebody that's working within a traditional organization?
Well, I'm the prime example for the self-employed I make a living on a stage. If I look at my strength, it's the connection I get with a live audience. It's that interaction. It's the energy I feel back and forth between. So what I had to do was figure out how do I replicate that? How do I look into the camera and try and reproduce what I can do on stage? So for me, I dove right into this whole technology, creating a studio, the best the best equipment you could have. Like, how do you, so you have to find the things that motivate you. Now, in addition to all of that, I still have to do my quarterly HST here in Atlantic, Canada, and all of the other stuff I don't like doing in my organization. But because I don't get to do my favorite thing, walk on stage, I had to find some things that would make me wake up and jump out of bed in the morning and want to go to work. And you have to do the same thing if you're an entrepreneur. And a lot of people have done that. They've volunteered, they've given food away, they've fed people, they've created manufactured masks and shields and plexiglass closures. Like, a lot of people really rose to the occasion. And I think that's what you have to look at in a time like this.
You talked in the presentation about competing for resources, and companies are going to be competing probably for that 14%, because everyone wants the highly productive employees. But there's going to be a new normal as we come out of the pandemic, and so I'm just curious about how you think the pandemic is going to change the job market, and where you see those employee shortages maybe being.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Prior to the downturn, we saw people desperate. I remember in the Ottawa region presenting to a group of technology companies. When they were hiring people, they were asking them to stay for 2 years. They said, look, give us 2 years. We'll help work on your resume and build your career, and you can go somewhere else after 2 years. There's this desperation in people. I think the hardest hit are going to be small businesses. And I think, I'm so unhappy to say this, I think the hardest hit segment are going to be younger workers and more unskilled workers. And I really don't believe this is a long period of time. I think that we will come back faster depending on what happens in the fall, if there's kind of a second wave. But there is still going to be a tremendous shortage of skilled workers. With 8,000 baby boomers heading into their retirement every week in Canada, we are talking a tremendous amount of resources leaving the Canadian workforce. And the shortages that were in technology and engineering and operators, investigators, all of that kind of stuff, that's still going to be there. I think the hardest hit are going to be the unskilled workers. You're muted, Scott. You're muted.
I did that on purpose.
But I'm a pretty good lip reader.
So we talked about employee engagement. Do I need to measure employee engagement to be able to improve it?
No, not at all. I think it's great. I believe in measuring everything, and I measure everything in my own organization. We measure any metrics I can find, I measure. But I don't think you have to measure it. I think you just have to do something about it. So for me, it's really just pretend that you had an engagement number and you're trying to make it better. And how do I get to know the people in my organization better? How do I grow the people in my organization? How do I inspire the people in my organization? But if you measure, that's great, because then you can see kind of year to year. And I really believe you should measure. But if that's cost prohibitive, if measuring is too expensive, then, and it doesn't have to be, but if it's too expensive, then I would just work on engagement. Think about it. Engaged employees are 5 times less likely to have a safety incident. If an incident happened by a non-engaged employee, it's 6 times more expensive. It impacts every single area of your organization. So whether you're a 2-person organization, a 50-person organization, or a 500-person organization, engagement is what's going to really have the largest impact in your organization.
And we've talked about the challenge of competing for high potential, high performers, and you've talked about the employee being a company's greatest asset. So do you like to work with things like employee value proposition, EVPs, to help recruit and have standards that become the culture?
Yes, and that's kind of an interesting question, because if you go back and read the book Good to Great, they say, go get the best people and get them on the bus. But the critical part of getting the best people on the bus is getting them in the right seats. So if you go out and you're looking to bring someone in, and they're really good at something, and that's their strength, and that's the value they bring into your organization, but you don't leverage that when you bring them into your organization, you have them doing something else because you really don't have that available, you won't keep them. So understanding the value proposition that they're bringing into the organization and aligning that with the employee when they come in, that's where the magic happens. So absolutely, I think you have to look at it from a value proposition for sure.
You ended your presentation talking about communication. In a time of isolation and even in normal times, why is communication more critical now than ever?
See, this is where it would have been really good if we'd had a lot of time together. The number one reason that the communication is failing in most organizations right now is because we are not very good at communicating across 5 generations. So I'm 57 years old. If I'm talking to someone that's 22 years old, my method of communication, the words I use, even the vehicle to communicate are so different. Like I might send a corporate email, they might use WhatsApp. I FaceTime my parents, I text my children. So you might think you're getting a message out there, but you're completely missing the message. Or you might be 22 years old and you're selling a product to someone that's 60 years old, and you're completely missing the message. So I think more now, with 5 generations in the workplace, the thing that's driving miscommunication isn't that people aren't trying to communicate. We're not doing it in a way that everyone we're trying to get the message to is actually hearing that communication. And that's the critical part. And then in times like this, you got to ramp that up and communicate more.
We're coming up to the close of our show. So Eddie, I wanted to thank you again for a wonderful presentation. We knew coming out of the presentation 2 weeks ago that you were a star, and you proved that again today. I don't know, Eddie, if you want to have any closing comments before I close the show.
My kind of closing comment, this is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I have traveled all over North America. In fact, I've traveled around the world speaking to audiences on engagement, and there's still a lot of really bad managers out there. And this is teachable stuff. So, if you walked away from this thinking, how do I engage myself and people around me, then I've done my little bit in this, kind of hour that we've been together to kind of move the world toward more engaged managers. And for that, I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. And I thank so much for the invite.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge too is the bad bosses don't know they're bad bosses.
Yes.
So again, Eddie, thank you. It's been wonderful seeing you virtually, and I know with the comments we're getting in the Q&A box now, we're saying how great the presentation was and how much they appreciate it. So thanks also to our friends at the Oakville, Milton, and District Real Estate Board for joining with us today. And with that, we will bring this episode of COVID Conversations to a close. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next time.
Bye-bye.